He really said it out loud on camera. Kendrick Lamar won't even pick up the phone for him anymore. And then he doubled down like that was supposed to make the game look powerful instead of painfully unwanted. Because once you're publicly begging for access to Kendrick while you're standing in the middle of your own album rollout, that's not West Coast unity. That's a career SOS. And here's the part fans are missing. This isn't just about a few spicy lines or a clip going viral. This is identity collapse in real time. The game, Mr. I put everybody on, Mr. I'm the big homie, Mr. Compton spokesperson, is now the guy tethering his whole public existence to a Kendrick response that is never coming. Meanwhile, Kendrick's silence is doing more damage than a diss track ever could because it tells the entire culture who's in the circle and who got quietly cut out. And the layered mystery is nasty because it's not just Kendrick ignoring him, it's the Nipsey angle, it's Black Sam's name coming up, it's other TDE connected voices stepping in like, bro, relax. And it's the game still acting like this is all part of some master plan while his own project gets swallowed by the circus. So when I tell you Kendrick allegedly laughed at this whole mess, and I'm going to explain why that actually makes business sense once we get to the industry part, just know we're not here for a petty recap. We're here for the moment it became clear the game hit rock bottom and didn't even realize he was holding the shovel. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Now, if you've been watching what's been happening around the game lately, you can feel that weird shift in the air. Not the, oh, a rapper is doing rollout antics shift. I mean the kind where you're looking at a veteran who used to move like a real factor, and now he's moving like a man who needs one specific person to validate him just to remember who he is, and that person is Kendrick Lamar. This matters right now because Kendrick isn't just another rapper you name drop for attention. Kendrick is a cultural thermostat. When he turns his back, the room gets cold. And when someone from the same region keeps forcing the connection, especially while aligning themselves with Kendrick's loudest rivals, it stops looking like friendly competition and starts looking like desperation with a Compton zip code. The stakes are layered. Musically, the game is trying to push a big project with big names attached. And any artist will tell you, if the conversation becomes, why are you obsessed with Kendrick? The music loses before it even gets judged. Culturally, West Coast politics are real, and people take the Nipsey legacy seriously, so you don't get to toss those names around like props for your own storyline without consequences. Financially, attention is currency, but there's a difference between attention that sells your work and attention that turns you into a meme. Reputation-wise, once the audience decides you're a clout-chasing character instead of an artist, it sticks, especially in an era where clips travel faster than albums. And the big question underneath all of this is simple. Why is the game acting like a man who needs Kendrick's acknowledgement more than he needs his own momentum? Because the answer to that is where the real story is hiding. So let's start with what we can actually see. First piece of surface evidence is the clip that set the whole tone. Footage circulating from an event tied to the game's release run where he's on mic, visibly heated, and the message is basically, I can't even get in touch with Black Sam, and then he pivots straight into Kendrick. I put Kendrick on his first mixtape. I took Kendrick on tour. I showed love, all that. And listen, even if you take those claims at face value, do you understand how crazy it is to brag about putting somebody on while simultaneously admitting that same person won't answer you? That's not a flex. That's you telling the public you have no leverage. And then he escalates it with that dramatic talk, saying he's not holding his tongue, talking like consequences don't matter, tossing out over-the-top lines about nothing living getting out alive. I'm not repeating it for shock value. I'm pointing out what it signals. When a grown man turns his rollout moment into I'm inevitable villain monologues, it's not strength, it's instability dressed up as passion. It's the Doc 3 desperado energy, loud, sweaty, and convinced volume equals respect. Second piece of surface evidence is how his own album narrative, again based on what's being discussed in the community around it, gets overshadowed by the Kendrick bait. People aren't debating his best song, they're debating why he can't stop orbiting Kendrick. Even the way fans describe it sounds like it's not the worst project ever. There are decent moments, there are big features, but the headline stays the same. The game is acting like he's in a beef that only exists on his side. And in 2026, that is a death sentence for seriousness. You don't want to be decent, you want to be undeniable. A veteran with a legacy cannot afford to be known as the guy doing antics. And the third piece of surface evidence is the way this whole thing got tangled with the Drake angle and that no breaks record chatter. Whether you love Drake, hate Drake, or you're exhausted by the whole discourse, you can see the optics. The game choosing to attach himself to Drake-related moments that fans are already clowning, while also trying to claim Kendrick is his guy. Pick a lane, because right now it reads like the clout cartographer strategy. Map yourself onto whoever is trending, then act shocked when nobody trusts your compass. And I think we just need to set the truth on what is actually happening here, because the surface level conversation is the game is dissing, or the game is joking, or Kendrick is too sensitive. But the visible facts are telling a different story. Kendrick is not engaging. The game is publicly frustrated about that. And the more he talks, the more he confirms the power dynamic is not what he wants it to be. And that's why the last part of the surface layer is the most embarrassing, the admission itself. He won't answer. That's the whole movie. When your biggest public update is I can reach top dog but not Kendrick, you're basically telling the audience you've been moved from peer status to nuisance status. Does everybody understand how humiliating that is for a rapper whose brand is built on being plugged in? And if you think that's where it ends, nah, because the next layer is where you see how the culture around Kendrick and around the West actually reacts when someone keeps forcing a connection they didn't earn. And oh, do I have more for you. Because the funniest part isn't even the game crashing out on Mike. It's watching the people around Kendrick's universe respond like a neighborhood has to quietly escort a loud drunk out the function so the night doesn't get ruined. And to the Doc 3 desperado defenders who swear this is strategy, I want you to keep that same energy when we get to the part where his own side starts treating him like a liability. Also, remember that Mac clip you've probably seen floating around? Yeah, we're going to talk about what that actually implies about status, real Compton ties, and why Kendrick doesn't even need to say a word for the message to land. Now we're in the cultural layer, and this is where the story stops being one rapper is mad and starts being the room has decided. The first cultural evidence is the response from people adjacent to Kendrick's circle, specifically the kind of voices that fans recognize as connected to that TDE-era infrastructure. One clip that's been circulating shows rapper Mac speaking on it, basically warning the game to chill and saying in plain terms, our Compton and your Compton not the same, and you not him. And I don't care how you feel about Mac as an artist, culturally, that statement is a stamp. It's not about lyrical ability in that moment. It's about authenticity credit. It's about who is considered real in the space that Kendrick comes from. Because if the culture felt like the game was moving righteous, that clip wouldn't hit the way it hits. People would ignore it or laugh it off or say family business. Instead, fans took it as permission to say out loud what they've been feeling. The game has been performing big homie while acting like a clout intern. Second cultural evidence is the way the Nipsey angle immediately changes the temperature. Once Black Sam's name is even adjacent to the discussion, especially if the narrative becomes, I tried to reach him or I can't get through, the audience gets protective. Not in a parasocial way, in a don't play with that legacy way. And it's subtle, but you can see the community line appear. You can beef, you can talk your talk, you can do rap drama, but certain names are not props for your rollout frustration. The second the audience feels like you're leveraging Nipsey's orbit to boost your own storyline, you're done. Third cultural evidence is the overall fan reaction pattern across hip-hop spaces. The jokes, the memes, the Gollum and Smeagol comparisons, the why is he acting like Kendrick owes him posts. And the reason this matters is because jokes are how the culture finalizes a verdict. Outrage is temporary, debate is temporary, but once you become a punchline, you're not fighting one opinion, you're fighting an algorithmic identity. Every new clip gets interpreted through the joke first. Everything you do becomes more evidence of the meme. Now, to be fair, here's the nuance. There is a counter-argument some people make that sounds reasonable on the surface. They'll say, yo, the game has history. He's been around. Maybe he did help early careers. Maybe he's just speaking from a real place. Maybe Kendrick should pick up the phone out of respect. Cool. That sounds mature until you look at the behavior, because respect doesn't require public pressure campaigns. Respect definitely doesn't require you to keep mentioning a man who's clearly avoiding you. Respect definitely doesn't require you to align yourself with narratives that antagonize that man, then act confused when he doesn't want you around. The way I see it, if you truly love someone as a peer, you don't try to force them to validate you in front of the whole internet. You handle it quietly. The moment you take it public, it stops being about respect and starts being about control. And here's the real tale. Kendrick's side isn't acting afraid, they're acting annoyed. That's a very different energy. Fear brings responses, annoyance brings silence and side comments. Silence is Kendrick's diss track. And culturally, that's why this is so devastating, because in rap, we're trained to think the loudest person wins. But in real life, the person who can ignore you is usually the one with power. So when you ask, did Kendrick laugh? I can't claim I was in the room, but culturally, the conditions for laughter are all there. The game is doing the most. The circle is basically saying relax, and Kendrick, Mr. Discipline, Mr. Album and Dip, Mr. Minimal Moves, doesn't have to lift a finger. And that's the moment the story has to pivot, because the most important part isn't even the disrespect, it's the system that rewards this behavior and the business math that makes a veteran do this in the first place.
Here's the pattern interrupt. This isn't just a rap ego problem, this is an attention economy problem. And the game is playing the exact game that the modern industry quietly forces artists to play, even when it makes them look pathetic. Angle 1 is rollout engineering. In 2026, music doesn't release, it competes. Albums compete with timelines, with podcasts, with beefs, with TikTok edits, with gambling streams, with breaking news, with everything. And when Inveteran drops a long project with a lot of features, the biggest challenge isn't quality, it's getting the public to care for longer than 12 hours. So what do artists do? They attach their project to a bigger storyline. They borrow heat from a hotter sun. That's why this Kendrick tether is so damaging. Kendrick is a heat source that doesn't need to cooperate. If you anchor your rollout to Kendrick will respond and Kendrick refuses, your whole campaign turns into a waiting room with no doctor coming. You can't cash the check you wrote with your mouth. And every day Kendrick stays silent, your rollout becomes more embarrassing because the premise of it is I matter to him, and reality is proving you don't. Angle 2 is legacy monetization and the hidden cost of clout behavior. Veterans don't just sell music, they sell booking power, brand relationships, doc deals, catalog value, and narrative. The cleaner your narrative, the easier it is to monetize your past. But when you become the clout cartographer, constantly redrawing your loyalty map depending on what's trending, you damage your legacy asset. Think about it like this. Labels, platforms, and sponsors don't just ask, can you rap? They ask, are you stable? Not emotionally like a therapist, stable like a business partner. If every headline around you is crash out, begging, threat talk, name dropping, then even if your music is decent, the business sees risk, and risk kills opportunity. This is how careers quietly shrink without anyone announcing it. And there's a third layer connecting both angles, the manufactured narrative machine. You can see how quickly the game versus Kendrick becomes content for pages, reaction channels, debate pods, and stan accounts. It's a grift loop. The more outrageous the clip, the more it spreads. The more it spreads, the more the artist feels incentivized to top it. Pretty soon, you're not promoting an album, you're feeding a machine that only pays you in attention, not respect. So when I say Kendrick laughing makes business sense, here's what I mean. Kendrick's brand is discipline and selectiveness. The less he engages, the more he looks like the adult in the room. And every time someone else spirals trying to pull him into a mess, Kendrick's silence reads like strength. It's not just personal, it's positioning. It's the kind of positioning that protects catalog value and cultural authority. Now, I want to be clear, this is speculation, but I think the game's real pain isn't Kendrick disrespected me. I think it's that Kendrick's silence is exposing something the game can't hide anymore. He's not central to that West Coast inner circle the way he wants the public to believe. And once that illusion cracks, everything else starts to look like compensation. So here's the major truth bomb, and it's the part that makes the whole story click. The game didn't hit rock bottom because Kendrick laughed at him. He hit rock bottom the moment he accidentally admitted Kendrick doesn't need him, doesn't fear him, and doesn't even consider him worth the energy. And then he kept talking like that admission wasn't catastrophic. Because in rap culture, being ignored is worse than being dissed. A diss says you're a threat. Silence says you're content. And when you're a veteran with a legacy, the worst possible outcome is turning into background noise in someone else's story. Look at the chain reaction. He puts Kendrick's name next to his rollout, and Kendrick still doesn't move. He implies he has ties, and the culture responds with questioning his authenticity. He speaks on reaching out to people around the Nipsey orbit, and now he's under a microscope for even bringing it up. He tries to sound inevitable, and it reads like a man trying to convince himself. Every move becomes another receipt that the power dynamic is not what he claims. And the consequence isn't just people clown him. The consequence is that his album becomes a footnote to his antics. His features become trivia. His bars become secondary. The audience remembers the meltdown more than the music. That is devastating for a rapper who clearly wants to be seen as a pillar. Allegedly, Kendrick laughing is the least surprising part. If you're Kendrick and you've built your whole identity on not being performative, why would you waste energy on the Doc 3 desperado doing theater outside your door? The laughter, if it happened, wouldn't even be cruelty. It would be disbelief. Like, this is what you chose to do with your name? And the coldest part is this. Kendrick doesn't have to win anything here. The culture is doing it for him. The circle is doing it for him. The algorithm is doing it for him. Kendrick's silence becomes a mirror, and the game keeps looking into it and seeing what he doesn't want to see. Now, let's land this, because I know some of you are thinking, okay, so where does this leave Kendrick, and where does this leave the game? Kendrick Lamar ends up looking exactly like the guy he's always shown us he is. Disciplined, selective, allergic to clout, and focused on work that lasts. Not because I'm glazing him, but because the evidence supports it. The biggest flex in this whole saga is
that Kendrick doesn't have to tweet, doesn't have to go live, doesn't have to sneak diss every week. He can let the noise burn itself out while he keeps his brand clean. And the game ends up looking like a man who wants credit more than he wants peace, even if he did help at some point. The way he's presenting it turns help into a bill, and nobody respects the guy who only gives to collect interest later. Remember the two moments that tell the whole story. 1, the game publicly airing out he won't answer. 2, people close to Kendrick's world publicly checking him with that you not him energy. Put those together and the picture is clear. This isn't a competitive rivalry. This is an exile. This is the culture saying you're not moving like us, and we're not letting you cosplay as family while you chase whatever's hot. Here's the contrast that sums it up in one line. Kendrick moves like a man protecting a legacy, and the game is moving like a man renting one. And I'm not saying the game can't recover musically. He can rap, he can make moments, but the way out of this isn't another dramatic clip. It's the exact opposite. Shut up, let the music stand, stop begging the internet to validate your relationships, and stop trying to draft behind Kendrick's aura like it's a free ride. Because the right person is still winning here. Not the loudest, not the messiest, the most disciplined. And this is only the start, because if the game keeps pushing this Kendrick tether, one of two things happens next. Either he escalates into a real direct record, something he can't walk back, and then he risks getting permanently stamped as the guy who attacked the West's biggest figure for attention. Or he keeps doing these half steps, these vague jabs, these public complaints, and he slowly turns into a full-time punchline who can't even drop a project without turning it into a subplot. Watch how the next few weeks play out in the ecosystem. Who posts with who shares what, who avoids what, and which voices from the West speak up again. Because that's where the real status updates happen, through proximity, not proclamations. And if Kendrick stays silent while the circle stays firm, that silence is going to keep getting louder. So, if you want my prediction, I think the Doc 3 Desperado is going to keep testing the fence until he realizes there's no gate for him on the other side. And when that realization finally hits, we're either going to see a hard pivot back to music or we're going to see a deeper crash out. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next video I want to do is the one nobody wants to talk about honestly, the way feature-stacked albums from veterans are being used as camouflage for relevance, and how the industry's attention machine quietly pressures artists into beef-adjacent rollouts just to survive. And the wild part? There's one specific recent example built around one viral clip that exposes exactly how the machine profits when a legacy name starts spiraling.